My name is Briar Davidson. I'm 17 years old, born and raised in a quiet suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. I work part-time at a small bookstore after school, saving every dollar for college. My life was simple, predictable, until the day my parents decided to surprise me with a family vacation. I spent weeks packing, thinking this trip might finally bring us closer. But at the airport, everything broke. My brother got a first-class ticket and a warm kiss on the forehead. I got a thin envelope with a one-way economy ticket to a city I'd never heard of and a $50 bill. "Briar, this is for the best," my dad mumbled before walking away with Mom. I stood frozen at gate 19, watching their figures disappear into the private lounge. That's when I realized this wasn't a vacation. It was a betrayal. If you were me, what would you have done at that moment? I still remember that afternoon vividly. My mom called us into the living room. She was wearing her favorite silk robe, the one she only pulled out for special occasions. My dad stood beside her with a glass of scotch in hand, and my older brother Mason leaned back on the couch like he already knew something I didn't. "Pack your bags, sweetheart," Mom said brightly. "We're going on a trip, all of us." For a second, I froze, all of us. We hadn't gone anywhere together as a family since I was 9. Every summer, Mason got to go to camps, yacht trips, private schools, and bonding weekends with Dad, while I stayed home with part-time jobs and community college classes. The idea of finally being included made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. "Where?" I asked carefully. Dad smiled in that way he does when he wants to seem warm but isn't really looking at you. "Somewhere warm," he said vaguely. "Just trust us." So I trusted them. I packed everything: shorts, swimsuits, my favorite book, even a small sketchpad. I worked extra shifts at the bookstore to afford a new suitcase. I told Mia, my coworker, that I'd finally get to see the ocean with my family. She hugged me and said, "You deserve this, Briar." The day of the trip came. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes the airport lights look harsher than usual. I remember the sound of wheels rolling over tile, the sharp echo of Mason's designer sneakers as he strutted ahead. He held his passport and first-class boarding pass like a trophy. At the check-in counter, Mom handed Mason his ticket first, kissing his forehead. She handed Dad theirs next. Then she turned to me with a thin envelope. "This is yours," she said softly, almost rehearsed. I opened it. Inside was a one-way economy ticket to a city I'd never heard of and a crumpled $50 bill. My throat tightened. "Mom, what is this?" Dad didn't meet my eyes. "Briar, this is for the best," he mumbled. "For the best," I repeated. "I thought we were going on a trip together." Mason snickered. "We are, just not all of us in the same place." I looked between their faces, waiting for someone to say it was a joke. No one did. Mom adjusted her sunglasses and said, "You're independent, Briar. You always have been. This is your chance to grow." She turned away. Dad followed. Mason gave me a mock salute before disappearing behind the tinted doors of the private lounge. I stood there at gate 19, surrounded by strangers and rolling suitcases, watching their figures blur into the glass like ghosts. The boarding pass in my hand felt heavier than bricks. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a vacation. It was a betrayal carefully wrapped in a silk ribbon. I boarded the plane numb. The flight attendant asked, "First time traveling alone?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The plane took off and Portland shrank beneath me, along with every illusion I'd held about my family. When we landed, the city was unfamiliar, colder. I dragged my suitcase through a cheap terminal, clutching my $50 like it was the last thread of home. I found a budget motel near a bus station, the kind with flickering neon signs and damp carpets. It smelled like cigarettes and forgotten dreams. I sat on the squeaky bed that night staring at the ticket. Gate 19. One way, no return. I tried calling my mom. No answer. Dad, no answer. Mason's phone went straight to voicemail. A text came in 5 minutes later from Mom. "Don't make this dramatic. You'll be fine. Love you." It was the coldest "love you" I'd ever received. The first few mornings in that strange city felt like waking up inside someone else's life. I'd stare at the cracked motel ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of the neon sign outside, trying to remember how I got there. The answer always hit the same way, fast and sharp. My family left me. The motel manager, a tired-looking woman with pink curlers in her hair, knocked on my door the third morning. "You pay or you go," she said flatly. I handed her some of the cash I'd saved from my bookstore job back home. Her eyes lingered on my suitcase, then she shrugged and walked away. I spent the rest of that day wandering around downtown with my backpack pressed to my chest. The city smelled like car exhaust and rain. My phone battery was dying, and so was the last bit of denial in me. I applied for a part-time job at a small independent bookstore near the bus station. It wasn't glamorous, dusty shelves, flickering lights, but when the owner, a gruff old man named Tom, asked, "You ever worked in one of these before?" And I said, "Yeah," he just grunted, "Start tomorrow." At night, the loneliness settled in like a fog. I tried not to check social media, but curiosity won. Mason had posted a photo on a yacht. Mom wore a sun hat and clinked champagne glasses with Dad. The caption read, "Family vacation vibes, sparkles water, Santorini, best life, no stress." I zoomed in on the photo. 3 people. No empty space for a fourth. My stomach twisted. I left a comment, something passive like "looks fun," and it was deleted within an hour. That stung more than I expected. The next morning, I showed up at the bookstore in the same jeans and t-shirt I'd worn for days. Tom didn't care. He tossed me a key and said, "You close up tonight, don't screw it up." It felt good to have somewhere to be, even if it wasn't home. I shelved novels, rang up customers, swept the floor. For a few hours, I almost forgot Gate 19. When I got back to the motel that night, a thin envelope was waiting under my door. My heart leapt. I thought maybe my mom had sent something. Inside, though, was a copy of my boarding pass and a short handwritten note. "You'll understand soon." The handwriting didn't look like Mason's. I turned it over, nothing else. I went to the front desk, asked who left it. The manager said, "A guy in a hoodie," didn't say a word. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway made me jump. My brain kept spinning. Who was M? What was I supposed to understand? One evening at work, I was wiping down the counter when Mia, my coworker back home, walked in. "Briar," she ran to hug me. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you were on some glamorous trip," I laughed dryly. "Yeah, surprise vacation. I'm living the dream in a discount motel." Her face fell. I explained everything, from the one-way ticket to the deleted comment. She shook her head in disbelief. "That's messed up. You can't stay in that place forever." "I don't really have a choice," I said. "This is all I've got." But Mia had that stubborn look I'd seen before, when she convinced Tom to let her run a book club, or when she talked me into applying for scholarships. "You're staying with me," she said firmly. End of story. I tried to refuse, but 2 days later, I found myself in her tiny apartment above a coffee shop. It smelled like cinnamon and printer ink. She gave me the couch and some clean clothes. It wasn't home, but it was safe. One night, as rain hammered the windows, I sat on that couch with my laptop, scrolling through old family photos. Birthdays where I stood half-cropped out of the frame. Vacations where I was the one holding the camera. Mason in the center, always smiling, always chosen. I whispered to myself, "Why me?" Then I opened the boarding pass again. I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint smudge of ink on the corner, like someone had scribbled something and erased it. My pulse quickened. I held it under the lamp. There, barely visible, were the letters T47 in pencil. It didn't mean anything to me, yet, but the deliberate way it was written made my stomach tight. I didn't know it then, but that tiny mark would unravel everything. I couldn't stop staring at the faint T47 on the corner of that boarding pass. I traced the letters with my thumb until the edges of the paper softened. It didn't feel like a random doodle. Someone wrote it there on purpose. Mia sat beside me on the couch, blowing on her cup of cocoa. "You're obsessing," she said gently. "Maybe," I admitted. "But this," I held the ticket up. "This was planned, I can feel it." She leaned over, squinting at the pencil marks. "T47, sounds like a gate number or a flight?" I shook my head. Gate 19 was mine. T47 wasn't on anything else. Not on my itinerary, not on the bag tag. It's like a code. I typed T47 airport code into my laptop. Nothing useful came up, mostly sci-fi movie references and some military stuff. But something in my gut refused to let it go. A few nights later, after another shift at the bookstore, I opened my email to find a single message with no subject line. It came from a throwaway address. "You should look where it started." The hairs on my neck stood up. "Mia," I whispered. "It's him again." She glanced over my shoulder. "This is creepy, Briar." I didn't reply to the email, but the words burned into my mind. Look where it started. The beginning. Home, Portland. The thought of going back made my stomach twist, but something inside me, the same part that used to stare at family portraits and notice the empty space where I stood, was done being passive. I bought a cheap bus ticket for a midnight ride back to Portland. I didn't tell Mia until the last moment. "You're seriously doing this?" she asked. I nodded. "I have to, whatever T47 is, whatever, going on, the answers are there." The bus ride took nearly 12 hours. The windows fogged over and I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment before the airport. The silk robe, the forced smiles, Mason's laugh. It wasn't impulsive. They'd planned this. I arrived at dawn. Portland was drizzling like it always did. I pulled my hoodie tight and walked through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. My family's house was a 15-minute walk from the station. I stopped across the street, hiding behind a neighbor's hedge. The house looked the same, white siding, red door, flower beds Mom paid someone else to maintain. But the driveway was different. Mason's new car, a sleek black Audi, sat where my rusty bike used to be. A light flicked on in the kitchen. Mom walked past the window wearing a silk robe. The same one. Dad followed, coffee in hand. Mason stumbled in, still in pajamas. They laughed together like nothing had happened. I stood there, soaked, invisible. For a second, I almost turned back. But then I saw the garage door was slightly ajar. Just enough. I slipped in silently, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The garage smelled like motor oil and damp cardboard. My old bike was gone. In its place were stacked boxes labeled ARCHIVES in Dad's handwriting. I pulled one open. Inside were old folders, legal documents, bank statements. Half of it was indecipherable to me. But then I saw it, an envelope with my name on it, dated 6 months ago. Inside was a letter from my grandparents' attorney, addressed to me. It congratulated me for being named a beneficiary of their education trust, a scholarship fund meant to cover any college I chose. My hands shook. I'd never seen this letter before. Why hadn't my parents given it to me? I shoved the letter into my backpack, along with a few photocopies of the trust documents. Just as I was about to close the box, I heard a car door slam. "Dad's home early," Mason's voice called from the driveway, my blood frozen. I crouched behind a shelf, barely breathing. The garage door creaked open fully. Mason stepped in, humming to himself. He dropped his gym bag and checked his phone. Then he muttered, "Yeah, I'm heading to T47 now," and left. I nearly gasped out loud. T47. It wasn't random, he just said it. As soon as he drove away, I sprinted out of the garage, heart pounding like a drum. The drizzle had turned into steady rain, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning. T47 isn't a code, it's a location, and Mason was going there. The moment Mason's car disappeared around the corner, I ducked into a nearby alley and pulled out my phone. I typed T47 Portland into the search bar. The first results were flight numbers, then a construction permit, and finally, a match. T47 was the code name for a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Private access. Family-owned businesses often used it to store legal records and valuables. My pulse quickened. Mason had said, "I'm heading to T47. What could he possibly be doing at a storage unit this early in the morning? I borrowed Mia's bike from her cousin's place and started pedaling through the drizzle, hoodie pulled low. The roads blurred past, familiar but suddenly full of secrets. My sneakers soaked through as I reached the industrial district, a mess of warehouses, chain-link fences, and damp asphalt. There it was. A faded blue sign, T47 Secure Storage. Rows of gray metal doors stretched out like soldiers. Mason's black Audi was parked near one of them. I hid behind a stack of pallets, heart hammering so loud I swore someone could hear it. Mason typed a code into the keypad, the gate buzzed open, and he disappeared inside Unit 112. I waited 10 minutes. 15. Finally, the metal door creaked open again. He carried a thick envelope under his arm and was talking to someone on the phone. "Yeah, the lawyer's taking care of the paperwork. She doesn't suspect anything," he said. Then, after a pause, "Of course she doesn't. She's out of the picture." I clenched my fists. He was talking about me. Mason tossed the envelope onto his passenger seat, revved the engine, and drove off. As soon as he was gone, I crept toward Unit 112. The keypad light was still blinking faintly, as if it hadn't fully reset. My fingers shook as I tried the most obvious code, Dad's birthday. Click. The door slid open. Inside, the unit was more like a makeshift office than a storage space. There was a desk, filing cabinets, a portable safe, and stacks of labeled folders. A single bulb swung overhead, casting long shadows on the cold floor. I rifled through the first drawer I saw. Bank statements, trust fund amendments, property deeds, all with my family's name on them. My name was there too, but crossed out in red pen. I picked up a folder labeled DAVIDSON Family Trust Revision. The first page made my stomach drop. It was a legal amendment, filed last year, removing me as a beneficiary from the education trust and transferring everything to Mason. It even listed reasons: lack of stability, financial independence, unsuitability for trust benefits. My hands started trembling. Lack of stability, financial independence, those were their excuses for erasing me. Then I saw a signature at the bottom. My grandparents' attorney's name, except I knew that attorney had passed away 2 years ago. They forged it. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. If this document was real, my parents and Mason didn't just leave me behind. They deliberately cut me out of everything. Suddenly, a noise, footsteps, I froze. The storage unit door was sliding open. I dove behind a stack of boxes just as two men entered, neither of them Mason. They wore dark jackets, talking in low voices. "Pick up the rest tomorrow. The family doesn't want loose ends," one said. "Yeah. Especially not her," the other replied. "Her, me." I held my breath as they moved around the room. One of them approached the filing cabinet, pulling out another set of folders. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. If they turned around, they'd see me. The taller guy glanced at the open folder on the desk. "She's probably long gone by now," he muttered. The shorter one grunted. "Let's hope so." After what felt like hours, they finally locked up and left. I stayed crouched until the sound of their car faded completely. My legs were shaking when I stood. I grabbed photocopies of the forged amendment, stuffed them into my backpack, and slipped out into the rain. The cold air hit my face like a slap. My hands were numb, but my mind was burning. This wasn't just family favoritism. This was premeditated betrayal, complete with forged signatures and legal erasure. As I biked back through the wet streets, headlights streaking by like comets, one thought kept looping in my head. They didn't abandon me by accident. They eliminated me. And now I had proof. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on Mia's couch with the stolen photocopies spread out across the coffee table like puzzle pieces. The sound of rain against the window blurred into white noise as I stared at the forged signature over and over again. "They erased you on paper," Mia whispered. She'd been reading over my shoulder, hands curled around a mug. "Not just on paper," I said softly. "They erased me in real life, too. They planned it." The words felt strange in my mouth, like they belonged in someone else's story, but the ink on those documents was real. The handwriting was my dad's. The dates lined up perfectly with everything: the coldness at home, the sudden family trip, the one-way ticket. Gate 19 wasn't a mistake. It was the moment they cut the last thread. Mia leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" I looked up at her. My reflection in the dark window stared back, eyes sharper than before. "I'm done being invisible." The next morning, I took the bus back to my neighborhood. It was still raining, though lighter now, like the city was holding its breath. I wore a black hoodie, my backpack pressed to my chest, the documents inside wrapped in plastic like treasure. The Davidson house stood tall at the end of the cul-de-sac, white siding gleaming. I walked up the path slowly, deliberately, like someone who had every right to be there. Mom opened the door. She froze when she saw me, blinking as if she were looking at a ghost. "Briar?" "Hi, Mom." My voice was steady, colder than I intended. Dad appeared behind her, tightening his robe. Mason hovered near the staircase with a smoothie in hand, smirking like this was some awkward family reunion. "Well," Dad said carefully, "this is unexpected." I stepped inside without waiting for permission. Water dripped from my shoes onto the hardwood floor. The house smelled exactly the same, lavender candles and expensive detergent, but it felt alien now. Mom shut the door slowly. "You should have called." "Would you have picked up?" I asked. Silence. I reached into my bag and laid the photocopies of the trust amendment on the dining table. The papers made a soft slap against the wood. Mason's smirk faltered for the first time. "I found these at T47, I said. "You know, the storage unit you apparently think I'd never find." Dad's face hardened instantly. "You broke into private property? You forged a dead man's signature," I shot back. Mom gasped. "Lower your voice." "Why?" I said. "The neighbors might hear how you cut your own daughter out of everything she was promised." Mason set his smoothie down with a little too much force. "You don't know what you're talking about." I turned to him slowly. "Really? Because I heard you at the garage." "Heading to T47. Ring a bell?" For a split second, panic flickered across his face. Dad moved closer, lowering his voice like he was negotiating. "Briar, sweetheart, you don't understand how complicated these things are. We had to make certain decisions for the family's future." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't feel like me. "Right, because I'm not part of the family, am I?" Mom stepped forward, her tone suddenly gentle. "Here, honey, this isn't what you think." "No," I cut her off. "It's exactly what I think. You left me at an airport with $50 and a fake smile. And while I was trying to survive in a cheap motel, you were signing away everything my grandparents left for me." For the first time, no one had a quick response. The silence was heavier than any scream. I picked up the papers and shoved them back into my bag. "I'm not here to beg," I said, looking at each of them. "I'm here to warn you. I'm not going away." Then I turned and walked out. The door slammed behind me like a gunshot. The rain had stopped, but the air was sharp. I stood at the edge of the driveway, soaked hoodie clinging to my arms, heart pounding, but not from fear this time, from clarity. For years, I'd accepted the background role in their lives. The forgotten one, the quiet one, the easy one to cut out, not anymore. As I walked toward the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I typed a message to Jacobs and Associates, the law firm listed on one of the old trust documents. My name is Briar Davidson. I have reason to believe my family falsified trust amendments. I need to talk. I hit send. Something had shifted. The betrayal at Gate 19 had broken me, but this was the beginning of something else entirely. I wasn't just the girl they abandoned. I was the storm they never saw coming. The email I sent to Jacobs and Associates felt like dropping a stone into still water. At first, nothing happened. Then, 2 days later, I got a reply. Ms. Davidson, we received your inquiry. Mr. Jacobs would like to meet with you in person. Can you come by our office Friday at 10 a.m.? L. Foster, legal assistant. I stared at the message for a long time before replying yes. Friday came faster than I expected. I wore the cleanest outfit Mia owned, a white button-down, black jeans, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. My stomach twisted as I took the elevator to the 15th floor of a glass building downtown. The law firm's reception area was nothing like the dusty bookstore. Polished floors, quiet lighting, and a receptionist who greeted me with a smile too professional to be real. Ms. Davidson, she said, Mr. Jacobs will see you now. I followed her down a hallway lined with framed diplomas. Inside his office, Mr. Jacobs stood to greet me. He was in his 60s, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of presence that filled the room without effort. Briar, he said, shaking my hand firmly, you look just like your grandmother. Please sit. The mention of my grandmother hit like a soft punch. I sat across from him, clutching my backpack. I've been waiting for this day, he said, settling behind his desk. I wasn't sure you'd ever come. I frowned. You were waiting for me. He nodded slowly. Before she passed, your grandmother left instructions, a trust, a scholarship fund. She wanted to make sure you had a future. He leaned forward. She suspected your parents might intervene, so she left documentation with my firm. I slid the photocopies from T47 across his desk. They already did. He adjusted his glasses and read through the pages carefully, his expression tightening with each line. This signature, he muttered. This man died 2 years before this amendment was filed. It's forged, no question. I exhaled shakily. So I'm not crazy. No, he said. You're the only one seeing clearly. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. Your grandparents set up a trust worth approximately $1.2 million, half for educational expenses, half for inheritance upon graduation. You were the primary beneficiary. Your brother Mason was secondary. Somewhere in the last year, that was reversed. I stared at the number. $1 million. My entire life, I'd worked double shifts for scraps while Mason cruised through prep schools. Can I fight this? I asked. He looked at me steadily. Yes, but it won't be easy. Forgery is serious. If we prove it, your parents could face criminal charges, and they'll fight back. I'm not afraid of them anymore, I said quietly. His lips twitched almost into a smile. Good. We'll start by issuing a request for discovery. That forces them to hand over all trust-related documents. We'll subpoena the storage facility too, T47. If the original forged documents are there, we'll get them legally. He handed me a stack of forms. This is a power of attorney. It lets me represent you. My hands trembled as I signed. It felt like the first real strike in a war. Over the next week, things moved fast. Jacobs filed the necessary motions. I received formal notice, Davidson Family Trust litigation pending. 2 days later, a black SUV parked outside Mia's apartment. I spotted it from the kitchen window. Tinted windows, engine idling. It stayed there for hours. Are you sure this isn't just your imagination? Mia asked nervously. They're watching me, I said. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. Briar? It was Dad. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Let's talk. No lawyers, family to family. I felt my pulse spike. You had your chance to talk, I said. He sighed. You don't understand what you're getting into. Lawyers will eat that trust alive in fees. Mason's future, the company, everything's at stake. Drop this. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Like you took care of me at Gate 19? I snapped. Silence. Then you're making a mistake. He hung up. That afternoon, Jacobs called me in. They responded, he said, handing me a letter. It was from their attorneys, Henderson, Lang, and Shore, one of the top firms in the state. Our clients deny all allegations of forgery and wrongdoing. We will pursue all legal avenues to protect their interests. Any attempt to defame or malign the family will be met with counteraction. Jacobs looked up at me. They're going to hit hard. We need more than copies. We need the original document from T-47. If it's destroyed, we'll have to build the case from circumstantial evidence, which is weaker. I thought about the two men at the storage unit, their low voices, the phrase "no loose ends." They're going to clean it out, I whispered. Jacobs leaned back. Then we'd better move fast. I'll get a warrant. In the meantime, stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside Mia's apartment made me jump. At 2 a.m., I checked my phone. A new message, no sender. Stop digging. No signature, just 2 words. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred into the darkness. Fear crept into my chest, but underneath it, something else burned hotter. They were scared. For the first time, the balance was shifting. 2 days after my father's thinly veiled threat, Jacobs called me into his office again. He looked sharper than usual, tie perfectly knotted, hair slicked back like he was stepping into battle. "We got the warrant," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Judge signed off on a limited search and seizure for Unit 112 at T-47. We're scheduled to go tomorrow morning with a court officer." My heart pounded. "So, we're actually going in?" Jacobs nodded. "If the original forged trust documents are there, this is our chance to secure them legally. Once we have chain of custody, their lawyers won't be able to claim tampering." He paused. "But there's a catch. They'll be notified of the search warrant immediately." "That means they might try to get there before we do." I leaned forward. "Then we beat them to it." He almost smiled. "Exactly." That night, back at Mia's apartment, I couldn't relax. The black SUV was back, parked down the street, same tinted windows. This time, I saw the faint orange glow of a cigarette behind the glass. Someone was watching. Mia pulled the curtain shut. "Briar, this is getting scary." "I know," I said, gripping the edge of the counter. "But this means we're hitting a nerve." She bit her lip. "Be careful tomorrow." I barely slept. When my alarm went off at 5 a.m., I pulled on jeans, a hoodie, and tied my hair back. Outside, the street was wet and quiet, the kind of cold that wakes your nerves up like electricity. Jacobs picked me up in his old black sedan. A court officer, Officer Daniels, sat in the passenger seat, stoic and wide-shouldered. Jacobs glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." We reached T-47 secure storage just after sunrise. Mist hung low over the parking lot. The place looked exactly like when I'd broken in: gray metal doors, damp asphalt, silence thick enough to chew. But this time, we weren't sneaking. This time, we had the law on our side. Daniels flashed the warrant at the security guard. The gate buzzed open. As we drove in, Jacobs muttered, "If they tried to clear it out overnight, we'll see." We parked in front of Unit 112. Daniels used a master key and popped the lock. The door slid upward with a metallic groan. My stomach dropped. The unit was almost empty. The desk, the filing cabinets gone. Only a few scattered boxes remained, shoved against the wall like afterthoughts. A faint outline on the dusty floor marked where the cabinets once stood. Someone had cleared it out fast. Jacobs cursed under his breath. They knew. I ran inside, scanning the remaining boxes. Most were junk, old family photos, Mason's high school trophies, a few business receipts. But in the corner under a tarp, I found a single metal box, locked with a padlock. "Jacobs," I called. He came over immediately. Daniels examined it. "It's not on the inventory," he said, "but with the warrant, we can seize anything reasonably connected to the trust." Jacobs nodded. "Cut it open." Daniels clipped the lock with bolt cutters. Inside were folders bound with rubber bands, an external hard drive, and a sealed legal envelope. Jacobs lifted it carefully, eyes narrowing. This might be it." Suddenly, the distant sound of tires screeched through the mist. A black SUV tore into the parking lot, stopping just outside the gate. Doors slammed. I knew that SUV. Mason climbed out of the passenger side, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, the same kind I'd seen at the storage unit before. They're lawyers. Henderson, Lang, and Shore. Daniels stepped forward. "This is an active legal search. You'll need to stay back." One of the lawyers flashed a smile so thin it looked like a blade. "We're here to observe. That's our right." Jacobs didn't flinch. "And it's ours to secure evidence. You're late." Mason crossed his arms, glaring at me. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Briar?" I met his gaze steadily. "Catching up." The lawyers started whispering among themselves, probably calculating how much they'd lost by arriving a few minutes too late. Jacobs handed Daniels the sealed envelope to log it as evidence. The men didn't look pleased. As we loaded everything into Daniels' vehicle, Mason leaned close to me and hissed, "You're ruining everything, for all of us." I leaned closer. You already ruined it. He scoffed. You have no idea what's coming. They drove off in a flurry of mud and exhaust. Jacob stood next to me, hands in his coat pockets, watching the SUV disappear. That, he said, was their first panic move, which means we're on the right track. We drove straight to his office. Daniels locked the evidence in a secure room, signing the chain of custody paperwork. Jacobs called a forensic document examiner to analyze the signatures and the amendment dates. This will take a few weeks, he said, rubbing his temples. But if this envelope contains what I think it does, their entire defense collapses. I stared at the metal box on his desk. What about the hard drive? He smiled faintly. That's the wild card. If they were sloppy, there might be drafts, emails, timestamps, things they can't explain away. For the first time, I felt like we had leverage. Later that night, back at Mia's, I received another unknown text. You're playing with fire. This time, I didn't hesitate. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Jacobs. Good, he replied. It means they're sweating. I set my phone down, staring out the window at the dark street. The black SUV was gone for now, but the war had officially started. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about exposing a system they thought I'd never understand. They underestimated me. And now, that was their mistake. The following week felt like the calm before a storm I could sense but not see. Every day after work, I went to Jacob's office to review evidence. We spent hours in a quiet conference room with stacks of files, sticky notes, and a giant whiteboard covered in arrows and timelines. The sealed legal envelope from T-47 had been opened under official supervision. Inside was exactly what Jacobs hoped for, the original trust amendment, complete with the forged signature, false notarization, and filing stamps that didn't line up with the probate records. It was a gold mine. There's no way they can explain this away, Jacobs said, tapping his pen against the signature. The notary listed here retired in 2018. The stamp date says 2020. That alone is fraud. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Your parents and their attorneys are going to pivot fast. They'll try to discredit you or us before this gets to court. I swallowed. How? He gave me a look that said I didn't yet understand how ugly these things could get. By making you look unstable, manipulative, like a greedy kid trying to cash in. I sat back, the weight of it settling in. They've been painting me as unstable for years. It's practically tradition. Jacobs smirked dryly. Then we'll rewrite the narrative. 2 days later, the counterattack began. I was shelving a stack of used novels at the bookstore when my phone buzzed with a notification from a local news site. DAVIDSON family feud. Daughter accused of breaking into storage facility, stealing private documents. My hands froze midair. I opened the article. A photo of me leaving T-47 with Jacobs and Officer Daniels was plastered across the top, taken from a distance. The article quoted an unnamed family source claiming I'd been acting erratically and had illegally entered family property prior to the warrant. My stomach turned. They were using the truth twisted. Mia came rushing from the register. Breyer, it's all over Twitter. Sure enough, Mason had posted a cryptic tweet. Sad to see family matters dragged into public. Some people will do anything for money. It had thousands of likes. I slammed my phone down on the counter and took a deep breath through my nose. They're moving faster than I thought. That afternoon, Jacobs called an emergency meeting. He'd already seen the article. This is classic, he said. They're setting the stage. If we let this narrative stick, by the time we hit trial, you'll look like the villain. I crossed my arms. Then we hit back. He nodded approvingly. Exactly. We'll file a defamation counter. More importantly, we'll release the warrant and chain of custody publicly. Show that the search was legal. Let facts speak first. He started dictating to his paralegal. I watched him work, calm, methodical, like a chess player moving pieces 10 turns ahead. But then something odd happened. 2 hours later, before Jacobs even filed the response, their legal team already had our plan talking points. They released a polished statement under the family's name, countering every argument Jacobs had just outlined in private, word for word. Jacobs froze mid-sentence. That's impossible. We just drafted this. How did they? His gaze slid toward the hallway. His office was secure. His staff were hand-picked. My heart sank. You think someone's leaking? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shut the file in front of him and said, From now on, we meet offline. No emails, no phone calls, only face-to-face. The next few days turned paranoid. Every time we met, Jacobs checked the room for listening devices. We printed nothing unless absolutely necessary. It felt less like a lawsuit and more like espionage. Meanwhile, Mason was thriving in the spotlight. He gave a heartfelt interview on a lifestyle blog, painting himself as the responsible son, trying to keep the family together while his estranged sister stirred trouble. They were building their image while trying to break mine. Then came the legal counterstrike. Henderson, Lang & Shore filed a motion to dismiss my claim, arguing that the documents I provided were unlawfully obtained and therefore inadmissible. It was a long shot, but they were testing the court. Jacobs wasn't rattled. "This is expected," he told me, flipping through the motion with a pen between his teeth. "We have the warrant. Chain of custody is airtight, but this is dangerous. They're anticipating our moves." One night around 11 p.m., as I walked home from a late shift at the bookstore, I noticed a figure across the street. A man in a gray hoodie standing too still. My heartbeat spiked. I ducked into a coffee shop just before closing and texted Jacobs. "Someone following me? Stay inside. I'm sending someone," he replied. Officer Daniels showed up 15 minutes later, scanning the street. The figure was gone. "This isn't random," Daniels muttered. "They're trying to shake you." I went home shaken but not broken. The next morning, Jacobs called me in early. He looked grim. "I found the leak," he said. My pulse quickened. "Who?" He slid a printed email across the table. It was a thread between L. Foster, his legal assistant, and someone from Henderson, Lang & Shore. She'd been feeding them drafts of our filings in exchange for a promised job at their firm. "She's been leaking everything," Jacobs said coldly. "She's gone, effective immediately." The damage is done. They know our early strategies. It felt like a punch. "So they've been 2 steps ahead this whole time." "Not anymore," he said. "Now we move in silence." That day, Jacobs and I rewrote our entire litigation strategy from scratch. No computers, no emails, just handwritten notes and locked drawers. And for the first time since the airport, I saw something shift in Jacobs' eyes. Not P. Once Jacobs fired the mole, everything changed. No more leaks, no more predictable moves. We switched to an old-school system, handwritten briefs, in-person strategy sessions, locked filing cabinets. It felt archaic, but it worked. Within a week, Henderson, Lang & Shore's rhythm faltered. Their statements came slower. Their counters weren't as precise. "This," Jacobs said, pointing at the board, "is the first time we're ahead." I leaned over the table, scanning our timeline. "So what's the next move?" He tapped a photo of the notary stamp. "We build pressure with evidence. Forgeries don't exist in isolation. Someone notarized those documents after the fact. We find that person, we break the whole thing open." We started by subpoenaing the notary office. The stamp belonged to a man named Daniel Deke Lawson, who'd retired in 2018 and moved to Arizona. But according to the amendment, he notarized the trust revision in 2020, 2 years after retirement. Jacobs managed to track down his address through some old legal contacts. A week later, I was on a plane to Phoenix with him, my first time flying since Gate 19. The memory of that boarding pass still burned in my chest, but this time I wasn't the abandoned girl. This time I was the one closing in. Deke answered the door in a worn flannel shirt and khaki shorts. He looked surprised when Jacobs showed him the document. "This isn't my signature," he said immediately, tapping the notary line. "And this stamp, hell, I turned this in when I retired." Jacobs asked if he'd be willing to give a sworn statement. Deke agreed without hesitation. "I don't know who forged this, but it wasn't me." That affidavit became our first external witness, a crucial piece. Back in Portland, we filed the affidavit with the court. Jacobs sent a clean, public response to the defamation campaign. The press release was clinical. "All actions taken by Ms. Davidson have been lawful and supported by court orders. Any allegations to the contrary are demonstrably false." He attached the search warrant, chain of custody, and Deke's affidavit. Within 24 hours, the tone online shifted. Reporters began asking why the family's documents contained a dead man's notary stamp. Mason tried to deflect in interviews, but his answers were shaky now. The Henderson PR machine was still spinning, but it was wobbling. Then Jacobs played his first real power move. He filed a petition for temporary injunction, asking the court to freeze all trust-related transfers and assets until the case was resolved. If granted, it would cut off Mason and my parents from accessing the money. The reaction was immediate. That evening, my father called me again, this time furious. "You've crossed a line, Breyer," he hissed. "You think you can embarrass this family in public and walk away unscathed?" I stood at Mia's kitchen counter, phone on speaker. Mia mouthed "Don't answer," but I couldn't resist. "You forged a dead man's signature," I said calmly. "I didn't embarrass the family, you did." "You're naive," he snapped. "You don't understand what happens when you push powerful people too far." I do now, I replied, and I'm still pushing. He hung up without another word. A few days later in court, the judge granted Jacob's injunction. Effective immediately, all trust disbursements were frozen. The look on Mason's face when he walked out of the courtroom was priceless, like someone had cut off his oxygen. Jacobs was composed as always, but I caught the smallest glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "They'll scramble now," he told me outside the courthouse. "Watch for mistakes." He was right. A week later, while combing through financial disclosures we'd compelled through discovery, Jacobs' associate found something odd. A series of wire transfers from the trust account to a shell company registered 6 months before the amendment was filed. The shell company's name? T47 Holdings LLC. I stared at the screen. They literally named it after the storage unit? Jacobs shook his head in disbelief. Arrogant or sloppy? Maybe both. Tracing the LLC led us to a mid-level accountant who had been processing the transfers. Her name was Caroline Vega, a woman in her 40s who worked for my father's company. She wasn't family, she was an employee. Jacobs scheduled a deposition. "If she cracks," he told me, "we'll have a direct line from the forgery to the money." Caroline sat across from us in a sterile conference room, looking nervous. Henderson's lawyers were present but quiet, letting her take the heat. Jacobs started gently, asking about her role. She kept her answers short, mechanical. But when he pulled out the T47 Holdings statements and asked, "Who authorized these transfers?" she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I don't recall," she muttered. Jacobs leaned in. "Ms. Vega, perjury is a crime, and we have enough here to subpoena your personal financials. Are you sure you don't recall?" Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. She swallowed hard, then said quietly, "They told me it was a family restructure. I just followed orders." "Whose orders?" Jacobs pressed. She hesitated, my heart thudded in my chest. Finally, she said it. "Mr. Davidson's, my father." Jacobs kept his poker face, but inside I felt a mix of rage and vindication. "Would you be willing to sign a sworn affidavit to that effect?" he asked. She glanced at her lawyer again. After a tense pause, she nodded. When we walked out of the building, Jacobs turned to me. "We just got our first crack in the dam. She's small, but if one person talks, others will follow." For the first time, I felt something new, not just anger, not just fear, momentum. The people who'd erased me were starting to lose their grip, and I was just getting started. Winning the injunction felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they did, I was controlling the pace. But victories in this fight never lasted long. A week after Caroline Vega signed her affidavit, she disappeared. Jacobs called me into his office first thing Monday morning. I was pacing when I arrived. "She didn't show up for her follow-up deposition," he said. "Her lawyer hasn't heard from her in 2 days. Her phone's off, her apartment's empty." My stomach nodded. "Do you think they?" He didn't answer, but the look on his face said enough. "This is exactly what I expected once someone cracked. They're trying to scare the others." Mia and I spent that night glued to our phones, refreshing news sites, waiting for something, anything. But there was nothing. Just silence. The next morning, a new article appeared on a business blog. Headline: DAVIDSON Family Trust Dispute. Accountant RECANTS Affidavit, CLAIMS Pressure, from estranged daughter. I slammed my phone down. "What?" Jacobs read the article with his jaw clenched. They got to her, or paid her, or both. The article quoted Caroline as saying she'd been manipulated by Breyer into signing documents under emotional distress. It was absurd, but it was public. And it was working. Comments flooded in online. "Another spoiled kid after the money. She probably blackmailed the accountant. Classic drama." Mia muttered, "They're painting you as the villain again." I didn't have time to wallow. That afternoon, as I was closing up the bookstore, 2 men in suits walked in. They didn't buy anything. They didn't even pretend to browse. "Breyer Davidson?" one of them asked. "Who's asking?" They handed me a thick envelope, a cease and desist letter. Cease all public statements related to the Davidson trust matter. Further defamatory claims will result in legal action and damages. I recognized Henderson, Lang and Shore's letterhead immediately. I called Jacobs on the way home. They sent me a cease and desist. "Good," he said. "That means we're hurting them. Don't say a word publicly. Let me handle this." But that night, something worse happened. At around midnight, Mia shook me awake. "Breyer," she whispered, "look." Through the blinds, across the street, the black SUV was back. But this time, the engine wasn't running. Its lights were off. 2 figures sat inside, barely visible. "They're watching the building," Mia said, voice shaking. I grabbed my phone and took photos from the window. My hands were sweating. "They're escalating," I whispered. The next day, Jacobs filed for a protective order citing harassment. but legal motions didn't make the SUV disappear. It stayed for 2 more nights before vanishing like smoke. Meanwhile, Mason went on another interview. This time, he wasn't vague. "It's heartbreaking," he told a sympathetic morning show host. "My sister's been struggling for years. We tried to help her, but now she's dragging innocent people down with her. Caroline didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire." The host nodded sympathetically, as if Mason was the victim. I watched the clip on my phone at Jacob's office, my jaw tight. "He's good at this," I muttered. Jacobs didn't disagree. "They're buying time and public sympathy. But remember, they can't spin evidence." He was right. The forensic examiner had finished analyzing the forged trust amendment. The report was damning, the signature was traced. The notary stamp was photocopied. Metadata on a scanned PDF showed it was created on Mason's personal laptop 3 months after the notary's retirement. "This," Jacobs said, holding up the report, "is the nail. If Caroline hadn't flipped, we could end this cleanly. But now their lawyers will claim she's unreliable, and they'll throw everything at discrediting you." I exhaled. "So what's next?" He tapped the report. "We subpoena Mason's laptop. If we find the original file on it, the forgery case is airtight." But as soon as that subpoena landed, the counterattack hit harder. The family's attorneys filed a motion for sanctions, accusing me and Jacobs of malicious prosecution, claiming we'd coerced witnesses and fabricated evidence. It was a desperate move, but it clogged the court schedule and forced Jacobs to spend 2 full days drafting a rebuttal. While Jacobs fought on paper, I fought in the shadows. One evening, walking home alone after a deposition, a black sedan pulled up slowly beside me. The window rolled down. A man I didn't recognize leaned out. "Drop the case," he said evenly. "You're not ready for the kind of war you're starting." I froze on the sidewalk. "Who sent you?" He smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" Before I could reply, the sedan sped off into the night. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, before pulling out my phone to call Jacobs. He listened quietly, then said, "This means they're nervous, but from now on, you don't walk anywhere alone, ever." That night, Mia insisted I sleep with the lights on. I didn't argue. Despite the fear, the cracks in their defense were widening. The notary affidavit, the forensic report, the freeze order, they were cornered, but they still had money, power, influence. And as Caroline's betrayal proved, they weren't above buying silence. As I stared out the window at the dark street, I made myself a promise. I've survived being abandoned at Gate 19. I can survive this too. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with a chill that cut through my hoodie. It wasn't winter yet, but the courthouse steps were covered in a cold mist that made everything look like a scene from a thriller. Mia walked beside me, clutching a thermos. "You sure you're okay?" I nodded. "I have to be." Jacobs was already inside, surrounded by stacks of files and 2 associates who moved like clockwork. His tie was crisp, his expression unreadable. "This hearing," he told me, "isn't the trial, but it's crucial. If the judge is convinced the case has merit, discovery expands. We can go deeper. If we lose here, they'll bury us in procedural motions until you run out of money." I swallowed hard. "No pressure then," he smirked. "Exactly." The family arrived minutes later. My father in a navy suit, Mason in a tailored charcoal one that probably cost more than my entire college savings. Mom wore pearls and her usual practice smile. They looked like the perfect American family walking into church. But the way Dad's eyes narrowed when he saw me, that was real. The hearing began with the motion to dismiss filed by Henderson, Lang, and Shore. Their lead attorney, a woman named Victoria Hales, spoke smoothly, painting me as an emotionally unstable young woman who unlawfully accessed private property and coerced testimony. She made it sound so neat, so clean. Then Jacob stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His opening line cut through the room like a blade. "Your Honor, the defendants would have you believe this is a case of a greedy child. In reality, this is a case of a forged trust, a dead notary, and a family willing to lie under oath to keep stolen assets." He handed the judge the forensic report, the notary affidavit, and copies of the original trust documents. Hales objected at every turn, but Jacobs anticipated each one. He moved like a chess player who'd studied every opening. When he reached the point about Mason's laptop, my pulse spiked. "Your Honor," Jacobs continued, "we have reason to believe the forged documents were created on Mason Davidson's personal laptop. We are requesting a forensic imaging order to preserve and analyze that device before any evidence is destroyed." Hales stood. "Objection. Speculative, invasive," Jacobs interrupted smoothly. The metadata of the scanned trust document matches the make, model, and serial pattern of Mr. Mason's laptop, which is publicly listed in Davidson Industries' procurement filings. That's not speculation, that's fact. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. Counsel, do your clients currently have possession of this device? Hales hesitated. Mason glanced nervously at Dad. That hesitation was everything. Jacobs pounced. Your Honor, the delay in answering speaks for itself. You request immediate preservation of the device to prevent spoliation. The judge nodded slowly. Motion to dismiss is denied. Motion for preservation and forensic imaging is granted. Mr. Mason Davidson, you are ordered to surrender your personal laptop to the court-appointed examiner by 5:00 p.m. today. Hales's jaw tightened. Mason turned pale. Dad muttered something under his breath. It was a clean hit. After the hearing, outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Flashes popped. Mason tried to push through without comment, but one reporter shouted, Mason, any reason you hesitated when the judge asked about your laptop? He kept walking, but the damage was done. The hesitation was replayed on every local news segment that night. Jacobs and I didn't stop there. We drove straight to the court-appointed examiner's office, where Mason's laptop was scheduled to be turned over. Unsurprisingly, they were late. Typical, Jacobs muttered. When they finally arrived, Mason looked furious. His lawyer handed the laptop over with a forced smile. The examiner, a quiet man in wire-rimmed glasses, took it carefully and signed off the chain of custody. We'll start tonight, he said. Preliminary results in 48 hours. 2 days later, Jacobs called me at the bookstore. Come to the office. Now, I ran. On his desk sat a printout from the examiner. In plain text, under the list of recovered files, was this line: Trust Revision Final, PDF created. March 12, 2020, 10:34 p.m. created by Mason Davidson laptop. Below that, 2 earlier drafts with file names like Trust Revision 1, PDF, and Trust Revision 2 Edit, PDF. Metadata confirmed the files were scanned from the same model of printer found in my father's home office. Jacobs leaned back with a satisfied look. They forged it on his laptop, edited it, and uploaded it. It's all here. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. This is huge. This, he said, is the moment their legal defense starts to collapse, but expect them to fight harder now. Cornered animals bite. He was right. Within 24 hours, Hales filed an emergency motion to suppress the laptop evidence, claiming unlawful invasion of privacy and overreach. It was desperate but noisy. The judge denied it in record time. Then the real twist hit. Late that night, Jacobs received an anonymous email with no subject line. Attached was a scan page from an internal memo at Henderson, Lang, and Shore. It outlined a strategy to plant fake evidence on the laptop to discredit the forensic examiner. I read it twice. Someone on their side sent this? Jacobs nodded slowly. Looks that way. We have a mole, but this time, it's in their camp. The war was turning. As I left Jacobs' office that night, the city lights blurred against the rain-soaked streets. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was barely keeping up. I felt like I was hitting back. The laptop evidence shook them. I could feel it. The confident press releases, the smug interviews, they all slowed down after the examiner's report was filed. But the Davidson family wasn't known for surrendering. They were known for counterattacks. 3 days after the report hit the docket, a wave of stories flooded local media. Not about Mason, not about the forgery, about Jacobs. Headlines screamed, lawyer in Davidson case faces ethics complaint. Jacobs accused of coercive tactics and inappropriate contact. With witnesses, I was at the bookstore when the first headline popped up on my phone. My heart dropped. No. I ran to Jacobs' office. He was on the phone, jaw clenched, pacing like a caged lion. They filed a complaint with the state bar, he told me when he hung up. Completely fabricated. They're accusing me of threatening Caroline Vega to sign her affidavit. They're going after you now, I whispered. He gave a humorless laugh. Of course they are. They can't break the evidence, so they'll try to break the man presenting it. The complaint was clearly strategic. It demanded a review of Jacobs' conduct, which, even if baseless, could delay proceedings for weeks. They're trying to bleed us dry with procedure, he muttered. Mia joined me later that night at Jacobs' office as we combed through the complaint line by line. It was detailed, too detailed. Some of the claims referenced internal meeting times and conversations that only a handful of people could have known about. My mind clicked back to the anonymous memo we'd received, the one exposing Henderson's plan to plant fake evidence. I said slowly, Jacobs, what if the mole on their side is feeding us because they're part of this ethics complaint too? Someone playing both sides. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. If that's true, this isn't just legal warfare. It's sabotage from the inside. Meanwhile, Henderson, Lang, and Shore launched a media blitz. Mason went on a nationally syndicated podcast, voice dripping with faux concern. "It's hard to watch," he said. "My sister's lawyer has a history of aggressive behavior. I just hope she isn't being manipulated by someone with ulterior motives." The host gasped appropriately. The comments section exploded. They weren't trying to win the case, they were trying to poison the well. 2 nights later, I came home to find Mia staring at her laptop. "Breyer," she said slowly, "you need to see this." On a gossip forum, someone had posted screenshots of my private messages with Mia about the case. Nothing illegal, but personal, emotional. I hate them so much. I wish I could burn it all down. They framed it as proof that I was unstable and vindictive. I sat down hard. "How did they get these?" Mia's face was pale. "I don't know, I never shared them." The realization hit us at the same time. Someone had hacked her account. I forwarded everything to Jacobs, who immediately brought in a cybersecurity consultant. "They're escalating," he said grimly. "Digital warfare now, they're trying to make you look dangerous." The consultant traced the breach back to a proxy server in Chicago, but the IP trail ended there. Professional work. Jacobs called an emergency team meeting. "Listen," he said to his associates. "They've turned this into a multi-front war, legal, media, personal. We stick to facts, and we find that mole." I stayed late that night, flipping through printed versions of the anonymous memo. One line stood out now more than before. "The laptop strategy will backfire if the examiner's timeline is exposed." Timeline. I compared the memo's metadata to court filings. Whoever leaked it knew about Jacobs' exact filing schedule, which wasn't public. Only 3 people besides Jacobs and me had that info: his 2 associates and the forensic examiner. The examiner was external. The associates were in the building every day. The next morning, I arrived early before anyone else. I walked past the file room. One of Jacob's associates, Hannah, was inside. She jumped when she saw me. "Breyer, you're here early?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Couldn't sleep." Her eyes flicked to the stack of files on the table. One of them was the examiner's timeline. "Late night?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yeah, just catching up." Something about her tone stuck in my head all day. That afternoon, Henderson filed a motion to disqualify Jacobs as my attorney based on the ethics complaint. If granted, I'd lose my lawyer mid-battle. Jacobs read it and sighed. "This is their biggest swing yet. If they knock me out, you'll be forced to start over with someone new. We can't let this stick." We prepared for the disqualification hearing like it was war. Jacobs gathered character witnesses, past clients, former judges. I gathered every message and record I had to prove Caroline hadn't been coerced. The night before the hearing, Mia asked, "What if they succeed?" I stared at the ceiling. "Then I fight alone, but I won't let them win that way." The next day, the courtroom was packed. Henderson's team argued that Jacobs had irreparably tainted the case. Hales delivered the speech like she was auditioning for an Oscar. Then Jacobs stood. Calm, precise. He dismantled their claims piece by piece. He produced signed affidavits from every witness he'd contacted. He highlighted inconsistencies in Caroline's supposed recantation. He even revealed the anonymous memo, framing it as evidence of their own unethical behavior. The judge listened silently, then said, "Motion to disqualify is denied. Proceedings will continue as scheduled." The air left my lungs in a rush. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Jacobs for a comment. He gave them his usual polite smile. "The truth tends to hold up," he said simply. I stood beside him, watching Mason in the distance. His confident facade was cracking. His jaw clenched every time a camera turned toward him, but I wasn't naive. Their attack on Jacobs had failed, but it revealed something important. Someone close to the action was leaking information, and I was going to find out who. After the failed disqualification stunt, Henderson, Lang, and Shore went quiet. Too quiet. Jacobs called it the silence before the next volley. I called it a chance to dig. The anonymous memo that had warned us about the laptop frame-up still gnawed at me. Someone on their side had risked a lot to send that document. But why? Loyalty? Revenge? Self-preservation? One night after everyone left Jacob's office, I stayed behind with a cup of stale coffee, and the case files spread across the table like a conspiracy board. Every anonymous leak left breadcrumbs, metadata, phrasing, timing. The first memo had been sent from a burner Gmail address, routed through multiple VPNs. But Jacob's cyber consultant had quietly given me something, the document's embedded author name. Author, HF. I tapped the initials with my pen. Henderson's lead attorney was Victoria Hales. That was H, but F. I started listing names from their side: associates, paralegals, partners. And then it hit me. Henderson's junior associate, Harriet Foster. She was often the one carrying files in and out of hearings. She sat quietly behind Hales during arguments, taking notes. She never spoke in court. Invisible, Harriet Foster. HF. The next day, I asked Jacobs casually, "What do you know about Harriet Foster?" He frowned. "Bright, overworked, underpaid. She's been at Henderson's firm for 2 years. Why?" "Just curious," I said, but my mind was racing. I started watching her during hearings. She was always there, sitting behind Hales, eyes darting between laptop and counsel table. Once I caught her glancing at Mason with what looked like contempt, not loyalty. Then came the break. 2 days later, I received another anonymous email. Same burner style. Attached was a draft version of Henderson's next motion, scheduled to be filed the following week. It contained their entire witness strategy, including plans to discredit Deke, the retired notary, by claiming early dementia. Author, HF. I forwarded it to Jacobs immediately. His response was terse. "We've got our mole," but he didn't want to spook her. Instead, he devised a plan. "We'll feed her something," he said, leaning over the table. "Something they can't resist using, but that only she would know. If it leaks back to Henderson, we'll know it's her." So we created a false procedural memo, claiming Jacobs planned to file a motion for expedited trial under a rarely used statute, one that would have forced Henderson's team into a brutal timeline. We accidentally left it in a folder in the courthouse library where Harriet often worked. 2 days later, Henderson filed a motion opposing our expedited trial filing, a filing we never actually made. Jacobs grinned when he saw it. "Gotcha." Now that we knew, the question became, why was she helping us? I got my answer that night. An encrypted email landed in my inbox. This time, it wasn't just documents. It was a message. "They used me. They're going to hang me out to dry. If I help you, can you protect me?" HF. My pulse spiked. Jacobs called a trusted contact, a retired federal prosecutor, who helped set up a protected proffer session for Harriet. 2 nights later, in a dimly lit conference room at a neutral location, Harriet Foster walked in wearing a hoodie, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked terrified. Jacobs went first. "You understand this is off the record until you sign the proffer agreement. Nothing you say will be used against you if it's truthful." She nodded quickly. Then she started talking. For over 2 hours, Harriet laid out the entire internal operation at Henderson, Lang, and Shore. She'd been the one who scanned Mason's forged documents 2 years ago, on direct orders from a senior partner. She'd been pressured to create backdated internal memos to make it look like the amendment was legitimate. She overheard Mason and Dad arguing about Caroline after Caroline cracked. They were worried she'd expose how the forgery started in the family office. She'd secretly started copying files and saving them to an encrypted drive as insurance. "They think I'm loyal because I'm quiet," she whispered, hands shaking. "But they're going to throw me under the bus the moment this blows up." Jacobs kept his poker face, but I felt electricity run through me. This was the crack in their foundation we'd been waiting for. She handed Jacobs a flash drive. "This has everything: internal emails, drafts, the first version of the forgery." Jacobs slid it into an evidence bag. "You just changed the entire trajectory of this case," he said quietly. Harriet signed a proffer agreement on the spot, agreeing to testify in exchange for limited immunity. When she left, Jacobs turned to me, eyes sharp. "This is our second twist. If her files check out, they're done. Completely." We pulled an all-nighter analyzing the contents. The emails were damning. Mason's name was on multiple threads coordinating with Dad and Henderson partners about adjusting timelines and ensuring probate smoothness. The original draft of the trust amendment even had Mason's comments in track changes, joking, "Guess the old man signs from beyond the grave lol." I stared at the screen, equal parts nauseated and vindicated. Jacobs leaned back. "We're not just defending anymore, Breyer. We're building the case that will bury them." But we had to be careful. If Henderson's firm suspected Harriet flipped, they'd destroy everything they could. So Jacobs filed a sealed motion for a preservation order on all Henderson firm servers, under the pretext of routine discovery. The judge granted it without Henderson realizing what it was really about. For the first time, they didn't see the punch coming. As I walked out of the office that morning, exhausted but exhilarated, I realized something. The girl they abandoned at Gate 19 was gone. The woman standing here was about to take down an empire. Harriet's flash drive was like a live grenade. We had to use it carefully, strategically, before the other side realized the pin was out. Jacob spent the next 48 hours locked in his office with 2 senior litigators, cataloging every email, memo, and draft document she'd given us. Every file was cross-referenced against discovery logs to ensure authenticity. "This isn't just helpful," Jacob said, rubbing his temples. "This is devastating. If even half of this holds up in court, Henderson's firm is looking at sanctions, Mason's looking at perjury, your father's looking at fraud." But the other side moved faster than we expected. 3 days after Harriet's proffer, she vanished from her apartment. I found out when Jacobs burst into the bookstore in the middle of my shift, tie loosened, face pale. "She's gone," he said. "Didn't show up for work. Neighbors say 2 men in suits came by last night." My stomach dropped. "You think they?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We immediately contacted the U.S. Marshals and invoked her proffer protections. Within hours, they issued a temporary witness protection order, relocating Harriet to a secure location. But the damage was already starting. That night, Henderson's PR machine struck back hard. A source close to the firm leaked that a junior associate had been terminated for misconduct and document theft. Harriet's name wasn't mentioned, but anyone who'd been following the case could connect the dots. The implication was clear. She's not a whistleblower, she's a criminal. Mason went on another podcast, voice oozing false sympathy. "It's sad," he said. "People get desperate. They do things they shouldn't. I just hope the truth comes out." The comments section lit up. She probably doctored those files. Breyer's lawyer clearly put her up to it. This whole thing is a circus. Wasn't just spin anymore, it was character assassination. Jacobs called an emergency war room meeting. He stood at the head of the table, Harriet's files projected on the wall. "They're going to try to make Harriet disappear legally and publicly," he said. "Our job is to make her testimony unerasable." He laid out the plan. File a sealed motion to admit Harriet's evidence under Federal Rule 807, the residual exception, which allows hearsay if it's trustworthy and critical. File for a protective order to shield her identity until trial. Subpoena Henderson's internal servers using the preservation order we'd already secured. I watched him work, moving like a conductor. Every document, every deadline, every filing was a note in a symphony that would end in a courtroom crescendo. But outside the legal arena, things were getting dangerous again. 2 nights later, Mia and I were leaving the bookstore when a dark sedan pulled up fast. A man leaned out the window and hissed, "Drop it, she's already gone, you're next." Before I could respond, the car screeched away. Mia grabbed my arm. "Breyer, I'm fine," I lied, heart hammering. Jacobs insisted on 24/7 security after that. Daniels, the same officer who'd helped with the storage unit warrant, coordinated with marshals. My life became a blur of depositions, legal briefings, and escorted walks home. Meanwhile, the court schedule loomed larger. The judge set the final pretrial conference for 2 weeks out, with trial starting shortly after. It was happening. Henderson's firm responded by filing a motion to strike Harriet's evidence. Their argument was slick. The files were stolen under breach of attorney-client privilege and cannot be admitted. Furthermore, the alleged witness is unreliable and motivated by self-preservation. Jacobs smiled when he read it. They just walked into our trap. During the hearing on the motion, he calmly revealed the sealed proffer agreement and chain of custody logs proving Harriet's cooperation had been lawful and documented. He also introduced independent metadata verification that confirmed the files originated on Henderson's own servers. Hales tried to object, claiming privilege. The judge cut her off. "Counsel, privilege does not extend to fraudulent documents." It was a brutal moment. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in Hales's eyes. After the hearing, Jacobs leaned toward me. "They're starting to fracture. Watch closely." He was right. The next day, a story broke in the legal press. A senior partner at Henderson's firm had abruptly resigned. No statement, no farewell email, just gone. Inside sources whispered that the partner had been the one who ordered Harriet to scan the forged documents. Mason and Dad were seen leaving the firm's offices late at night, faces tight. Their legal team was splintering from within. Back at Jacob's office, we prepared our witness list. Harriet would testify under protection. Deke, the retired notary, had agreed to fly in. The forensic examiner was ready. Even Caroline Vega, the accountant who'd recanted, had quietly reached out through her lawyer to clarify her statement before trial. "She's scared," Jacobs said, "but she doesn't want to go down with them." Piece by piece, the wall they'd built around their lies was crumbling. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet, because I'd grown up in this family. And I knew one thing better than anyone: they fight the hardest when they're cornered. As I stared out Jacob's office window at the Portland skyline, the weight of what was coming settled on me. The girl who once stood at gate 19, abandoned, powerless, was now days away from walking into a courtroom to confront them all. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left behind. The morning of the trial, the courthouse didn't feel like a building anymore. It felt like a living thing, humming, vibrating, waiting to decide my fate. I stood outside the heavy wooden doors, breathing in the crisp October air. Mia squeezed my hand. "You ready?" I nodded. I'd been waiting for this day since gate 19. Jacobs was already inside, calm as ever, sorting through binders and color-coded tabs like a surgeon prepping for an operation. "Once we start," he said softly, "don't look at the jury. Don't look at the cameras. Look at me or the judge, that's it." I took my seat at the plaintiff's table as the defense filed in. Mason walked with forced confidence, my father beside him, his expression carved from stone. Mom trailed a few steps behind, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her face perfectly composed as if none of this concerned her. The judge entered. "All rise." And just like that, it began. Opening statements, Hales went first. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, theatrical. "This case," she told the jury, "is not about justice. It's about greed. It's about a young woman who, after years of estrangement, decided to claim what was never hers. She broke into family property, manipulated vulnerable individuals, and now seeks to rewrite history for financial gain." She gestured toward me like I was a headline, not a human being. Mason nodded along solemnly. Then Jacob stood. "No theatrics, no dramatics. This case is about fraud," he said evenly. "A forged trust, a dead notary, a laptop that doesn't lie, and a family who thought no one would ever question them." He looked the jury in the eye. "We will show you documents they created, witnesses they intimidated, and a pattern of deceit designed to erase one person's rightful inheritance, my client, Briar Davidson." My heart pounded, but his voice was steady. It grounded me. Witnesses. The first witness was Deke, the retired notary. His testimony was simple and devastating. He confirmed he hadn't notarized the document. He identified the fake stamp. He described when he'd turned in his notary book 2 years before the date on the amendment. Hales tried to rattle him on cross. "Isn't it possible, sir, that you simply forgot?" Deke leaned forward, voice firm. "Ma'am, I might forget my car keys. I don't forget notarizing a trust for people I've never met." The jury laughed softly. Even the judge cracked a small smile. Next was the forensic examiner. He explained in meticulous detail how Mason's laptop contained 3 versions of the forged amendment, including one with tracked comments. Jacobs projected the screen for the jury. Mason's own words lit up in blue. "Guess the old man signs from beyond the grave law." You could feel the shift in the room. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters scribbled furiously. Then came Harriet. She walked in under protection, flanked by marshals. Her hands trembled as she took the stand, but her voice was clear. She detailed everything: how she'd been ordered to scan the forged documents, create backdated memos, and keep quiet. She explained why she came forward. "I thought I could live with it," she said, eyes down. "But then I saw what they were doing to Briar, the lies, the smear campaigns. I realized they'd do the same to me if it suited them. So I told the truth." Hales attacked her hard on cross. "Isn't it true you were facing termination? Isn't it true you came forward to save yourself?" Harriet met her gaze steadily. "I came forward because I was tired of being part of a lie." It landed. Hard. The defense strikes back. Mason took the stand late in the 3rd day. His performance was flawless, or almost. He spoke about family unity, about my troubled sister, about protecting Dad's legacy. But under cross-examination, Jacobs cornered him. "Mr. Davidson, is this your laptop?" "Yes." "Is this your comment on the trust amendment draft?" "It appears so." "Did you write, 'Guess the old man signs from beyond the grave law'?" "I don't remember." "Would you like to see the metadata timestamps?" Mason's composure cracked. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Then Jacobs dropped the final twist. He projected a series of emails between Mason and my father, recovered from Henderson's servers via Harriet's flash drive. One in particular made the courtroom go silent. From Mason to Dad subject, RE, the amendment once Briar's out of the picture, we can reroute the T-47 transfers without scrutiny. Hale says once probate's finalized, it's untouchable. We just need everyone on message. My father shifted uncomfortably at the defense table. Jacobs turned to Mason. "Did you write this?" Mason's lawyer objected. Overruled. Mason stammered. "It's being taken out of context." The jury's faces said everything. My testimony finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand with my heart in my throat. Jacobs had prepped me for days, drilling every possible question. Hales tried to paint me as unstable, vindictive. Isn't it true you resented your family for leaving you at an airport? Yes, I said plainly, because it was the day I realized I didn't matter to them. Isn't it true you want their money? I looked at the jury. I want what my grandmother intended to give me. Nothing more, nothing less. I want the truth on paper to match the truth in reality. Silence. Jacob's redirect was brief but powerful. Breyer, why are you here? I swallowed. Because I refuse to be erased. Hales's closing argument was passionate but hollow now. The holes were too deep to patch. Jacob's closing was quiet, measured. They thought they could rewrite the truth. They thought no one would question a forged signature, a doctored timeline, or a daughter they believed would stay silent, but she didn't. He gestured toward me. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the witnesses. This is not a family dispute. This is fraud, and justice is long overdue. The jury deliberated for 2 days. It felt like 2 years. When they returned, my hands shook so badly I had to hold Mia's arm to keep still. The foreperson stood. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Breyer Davidson. The trust amendment is deemed fraudulent. Assets are to be restored. Damages awarded in the amount of, I didn't hear the number. I just heard in favor of the plaintiff. Mason's face crumpled. My father stared straight ahead, expression blank. Mom dabbed at non-existent tears. Jacob squeezed my shoulder. You did it. No, we did it. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever at Gate 19. Power and freedom. When the gavel finally came down, it didn't sound like the end of a trial. It sounded like the end of a lifetime. The courtroom emptied slowly, like air leaking from a balloon that had been stretched too tight for too long. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Lawyers packed up binders. The jurors slipped through side doors, their duty done. I stayed seated at the plaintiff's table, staring at the empty witness stand. That wooden chair had held my past, my pain, my truth. Now it was just furniture again. Mia knelt beside me, her face lit with relief. You did it, she whispered. Jacobs was already fielding calls from other attorneys and journalists, politely declining interviews. He caught my eye and gave me a small, proud nod, the kind that said this chapter is closed. Then they entered, Dad, Mason, Mom. For a second the years fell away and I was 15 again, standing at Gate 19, watching them walk away. Mason's face was pale, jaw clenched, fury simmering under the surface. Dad walked stiffly, like a man who'd lost a game he believed was rigged in his favor. Mom, well, she was Mom, composed, careful, as if nothing could touch her. They stopped a few feet from me, no cameras, no jury, just us. My father spoke first. I hope you're happy, he said flatly. I stood slowly. I'm not happy, I said. I'm free. Mason stepped forward. You ruined us. I met his eyes. No, you ruined yourselves the moment you forged that trust. He flinched but didn't reply. Mom finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk. Families don't take each other to court, Breyer. I laughed softly. Families don't abandon their daughters at airports either. Her mask cracked for the first time, just a flicker, a tiny tremor at the corner of her mouth. Then it was gone. They turned to leave, but Mason paused at the door. You think you won, he said, not looking back, but you'll always be the outsider. I smiled. Then I guess I finally found where I belong. They left without another word. And for the first time in years, I didn't follow. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight broke through gray clouds like someone had drawn the curtains on a dark room. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones outstretched. I answered a few questions, careful and brief. I wasn't interested in gloating. I just wanted air. When one reporter asked, Breyer, what would you say to your family if they're watching this? I paused, choosing my words. I'd say I forgive them, I said slowly. Not because they asked, but because I'm done carrying their weight. Mia squeezed my hand. Jacob stood nearby, quietly proud. For years, I'd carried their decisions like chains. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment of silence had wrapped tighter and tighter. Today, the lock finally clicked open. The weeks after the verdict felt strange. Quiet. The legal aftermath was messy, transferring assets, unwinding shell companies, restructuring the trust. Jacobs handled most of it, occasionally sending me updates like, T47 Holdings is dissolved. Transfers complete. Mason filed an appeal, but it was weak. His lawyers were bleeding credibility after the trial. Harriet's testimony had detonated their defense from the inside. Meanwhile, I started to reclaim pieces of my life. I moved out of the tiny apartment above Mia's bookstore and into a small house on the edge of Portland. Nothing fancy, just space that was mine. The house had creaky floors and a stubborn front door that stuck in the rain. But when I turned the key that first night, alone, it felt like more than a house. It felt like ownership. Mia brought over pizza and cheap champagne. We sat on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, laughing about the fact that I didn't even have curtains yet. For the first time in years, laughter wasn't something rare or stolen. It was just there. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Jacobs came by with a stack of papers. "It's done," he said, handing them to me. They were the final probate orders. My grandmother's original wishes restored. The estate had been split as she'd intended, with my share finally recognized. "I don't know how to thank you," I said. He gave a small smile. "You already did, you didn't give up. But even victory has echoes." Sometimes, at night, I'd catch myself staring at my phone, half expecting a call from Dad that would never come. Or I'd see a family in an airport and feel that old ache in my chest, the 15-year-old girl waiting for someone who never came back. Healing doesn't erase the past. It makes room for the future. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell like a quiet apology, dusting the streets of Portland in white. Life didn't snap back to normal overnight, it rebuilt itself slowly, one honest piece at a time. Jacobs closed the office late one Friday and came over with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on my back porch wrapped in blankets, watching our breath swirl in the cold air. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "most people would have taken a settlement when they saw the odds stacked like that. I've had CEOs walk away with less at stake." "I thought about it," I admitted. 100 times. "But every time I did, I'd see that gate at the airport." He nodded. "You didn't just win a case, Breyer, you rewrote your story." For the first time, I believed him. A few weeks later, I got a postcard from Harriet. She'd been relocated temporarily, but thanks to Jacob's contacts, she'd been accepted into a whistleblower protection program. She wrote in neat, careful handwriting. "For years I thought staying quiet was the safest option. Turns out, silence is what kept me trapped. Thank you for not giving up." HF, I smiled reading it. She risked everything to tell the truth. In a strange way, we'd both been invisible women in someone else's story until we decided to speak. I also visited Deke, the retired notary, at his modest home in Arizona. He greeted me on the porch with a grin. "I told my bowling league I helped take down a forged trust," he said proudly. "They bought me dinner for a week." I laughed. "You earned it." His courage had been the first domino. Without him, nothing else would have fallen into place. Even Caroline Vega, the accountant who'd once recanted out of fear, reached out. She asked to meet in a cafe downtown. She looked exhausted but lighter somehow. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "They scared me, but seeing you fight, it made me realize I didn't have to stay quiet forever." "It's never too late to tell the truth," I said gently. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "You gave me a way out I didn't think I had." One night, Mia and I hosted a small dinner at my house. Jacobs, Deke, Caroline, and a couple of Jacobs' paralegals came. There was no champagne or media or courtroom theatrics. Just food, laughter, and the quiet knowledge that every person at that table had played a part in something bigger than themselves. At one point, Jacobs raised his glass. "To Breyer," he said, "for proving that blood isn't destiny, and that the truth still matters." My throat tightened. I wasn't used to being toasted. I stood and lifted my own glass. "To all of you, for standing with me when no one else would, for helping a girl who once thought she had no power find her voice again." The clink of glasses felt like a full-circle moment. As months passed, the media frenzy died down, Mason's appeal fizzled, my father retreated into silence. Mom sent one letter, short, careful, more about optics than love. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore. I just wasn't theirs to control. I began volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, helping young people navigate guardianship and inheritance issues. It wasn't glamorous, but every time I saw someone walk through that door looking lost, I saw a piece of my younger self. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in clutching a folder of crumpled documents. She reminded me of me at 15, scared but stubborn. She looked at me and whispered, "I don't think anyone going to believe me." I leaned across the desk and said softly, "I do." Sometimes I still think about Gate 19, about the silence of that terminal, the sound of wheels rolling away without me. But now, when I picture it, I see myself walking away too, not abandoned, but choosing my own gate, choosing my own story. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this: truth is slow. It's fragile. It takes time. But once it starts to speak, it doesn't go quiet again. I thought power was something families gave you: names, legacies, signatures on paper. But real power was in the moment I stood up, said no, and meant it. And that power, it's mine now. Forever.